coming. Thank you, Dr. Nixon, for being our assessor. We are doing Angélica's second seminar, looking forward to feedback from everyone after we get some questions from the assessor. Angélica?
Sí. Hola, and thank you all for being here. I'm seeing like people I had not seen before, so I really thank you, Samantha and Lisa, for being here. I've called this second seminar, I've titled it Sitting on Artifacts of Gender. Woven palm leaf guano furniture is recognized as a traditional furniture of República Dominicana. Imagine I place a guano rocking chair in front of you. If you look attentively, you can see its wooden frame with the notable... Oh, yes. And I've titled this second seminar, Sitting on Artifacts of Gender. Woven palm leaf guano furniture is recognized as the traditional furniture of República Dominicana. Imagine I place a guano rocking chair in front of you. If you look attentively, you can see its wooden frame with the notable irregularity of handmade crafts, the guano tamed by a woman's rugged hands. So how does guano furniture production and consumption reinforce gender power relations? The purpose of this seminar is to reflect on how the data I've collected so far answers my research questions. Secondly, this seminar paper describes my conceptual framework and the methods that are most useful to shaping the approach of this study. It makes sense of how furniture is gendered in the República Dominicana and how many women experience empowerment or disempowerment in relation to furniture, its production and consumption. Thirdly, I discuss my findings, resume them in chart, and invite you and ask you questions about it. It's 7 a.m. and I've ridden my bicycle 40 minutes, about 7 kilometers, to reach Clavijo in the province of Santiago Rodriguez. From where I stood in the middle of the main dirt road, Tabita looked like a palm leaf bush with human legs. By then, I knew she had come down from the mountain, La Loma, and had cut green leaves so she could wove arganas for $2.55. Every time I say dollars, it will be American dollars. An argana is a woven guano bag used to transport ground provisions. It is sold in pairs so that one argana falls on each side to balance the load on top of the donkey, horse, motorcycle, or whatever mode of two-wheel transportation they can afford. This happened on January 2017, but it could have been any other day of the past 100 years. Aside from these arganas, guano is also used to make furniture and crafts. In Santo Domingo, la capital, we speak of muebles de guano, that is, guano furniture, when referring to the traditional Dominican furniture that is made from wood and braided palm tree leaves. But in truth, not all of it is guano, which is a particular palm. Tabita and I are among 106 women that will share with you the story of how these muebles de guano reinforce gender power relations as seen through the lives of women like ourselves, who either produce or buy traditional Dominican furniture, or, considering what I have exposed, what resembles it. It shows some distinctions as well as overlaps between women producers that cannot afford to consume what they produce and women consumers in La Capital that do not produce what they consume. In many ways, this furniture is made by women for women, but paradoxically, it materializes and perpetuates gender inequities that I will trace from the inception of guano weaving as a feminine trade in the countryside to its venture becoming part of the domestic furniture of middle and high-class women in La Capital. To that end, the key question this study and the story it tells seeks to answer is: How does guano furniture production and consumption reinforce gender power relations? Drawing on this main question, other queries give direction to my research and clarify the constructs of my process of analysis. For example, how does guano furniture production and consumption create gender power relations? And how does the production and consumption of guano furniture create and reproduce ideological and material relations of gender, as Barreto would say? Following with Ravitch, Regan, and Maxwell, I have relied on different sources to construct my conceptual framework, experiential knowledge, experiences with pilots, and exploratory research conducted. All these have shaped my approach, methodology, and the methods chosen to answer my research questions. And now I would like to describe my conceptual framework with regards to the exploratory research, which led to preferred theories to inform my findings. I met Minolma, a talented weaver and community leader, on June 2011. An acquaintance sent me to meet her personally when I asked about traditional Dominican guano furniture. Aside from my personal interest as a carpenter in trade and a furniture designer, I had gotten a job lecturing a couple of furniture design courses for a university in La Capital and was anxious to try filling the gap between theory and practice, particularly for students whose lives seemed permeated with foreign design practices completely disconnected from our socio-economic reality, including gendered relations and inequities. During one of my visits, Minolma told me that what they wove for traditional Dominican furniture was not guano, but cana, and that until recently no one had made guano furniture. Her declaration left me dumbfounded because I had been visiting and speaking to her since 2011 and only so recently had found out. That is how casually I learned that guano had became a generic name to refer to the raw material of any woven craft, and that the palm leaf weavers, las tejedoras, whom I had spoken to, had not bothered to clarify the difference between these palms and the distinct techniques to weave them. I was able to trace my misconception to word of mouth because popular knowledge refers to most, if not all, woven craft as guano. So did misinformed newspaper articles. Since Minolma had not made this distinction before, even when I had interviewed her and visited her with students from La Capital, I imagined how irrelevant she understood this information must be for me. I envisioned her in her role of a peasant tejedora de guano, speaking to me conjured in the role of a university lecturer from La Capital among the many roles that I must represent to her, but this one being outstanding considering how often she mentioned it. According to Ackerley and True, to be authentically qualitative, a research project must be reflective and evolve, adjusting to changes. Exploring this situation enabled me to consider it past it enacting a personal matter between Minolma and I, to speaking of internalized oppression, and with regards to my ignorance and the misguided newspaper narratives' invisibility. For all our different worlds as tejedoras de guano, or women from La Capital, the salience and commonality of our oppression laid latent in these. However, how a minority like las tejedoras are treated is a litmus test to measure the acidity of a society for its minorities. A suitable theory for a theoretical framework elucidates relations that otherwise one may not see. So I chose Eugene Barreto's material and ideological relations of gender and Lynn Weber's conceptual framework for understanding race, class, gender, and sexuality. I first read about Professor Barreto's material and ideological relations in the issue of the journal Feminist Review that Prof. Mohammed edited. And Lynn Weber is a professor in psychology, and she has been Critica said that she has made pioneering work in studying the intersectionality of contested concepts like race, class, gender, and sexuality. And the Oxford University Press published this book, which is called Understanding Race, Class, Gender, and Sexuality, a Conceptual Framework. Weber's conceptual framework for understanding these concepts comprises of three main facets that, as you will see, have some common ground with Barreto's. The three main facets are ideological, political, and economic ones. The ideological aspect is the think tank whose production and distribution of ideas allow for these oppressive social systems to take place without little resistance. The political are the state and military institutions that create and reinforce law for citizens and therefore non-citizens. And finally, the economy refers to the profit-making institutions that ensure exploitative commercial relations. This triad is straightforward and commonsensical, but in its intricate detail, Weber dwells into the nuances of gender oppression. Weber lists 6 qualities that all these contested concepts possess. Among these are the pervasiveness and persistency, which I think relates directly to my case, and are also among the main reasons that explain why people would accept systems of oppression, as race, class, gender, sexuality could be as normal and inevitable. Another one of the qualities that is listed is that these are power-based, which substantiate how these systems of oppression come to exist. Society's dominant groups are the engine that keep the system running. Neither mass media in República Dominicana nor our educational system show the life of experienced minorities often, so it seems as these do not exist. In the same manner, when minorities are portrayed like las tejedoras, it is usually in a stereotypical way, which also speaks to their invisibility in the sense that they're not really seen, but conjured as static and oversimplified characters. Since dominant groups are not at a loss, it is easy to dismiss this as an misrepresentation or underrepresentation. The ubiquity of disempowering messages that las tejedoras are exposed to eventually turn out to affect their opinion of themselves. Whether they were able to do both their partner's field work, that is, like tending the land, or sustaining the family's livelihood with their guano weaving, they spoke of themselves without gravitas. For example, Minolma constantly reminded me that she had not gone past 2nd grade, only wove since she was 6, and had brought up 4 children with this. She had internalized her supposed intellectual inferiority with regards to my schooling, and had no consideration for her mothering or being the breadwinner. In the process of internalized oppression, a person would judge themselves with the measuring stick of a dominant group, recognize their inferiority, and accept their inferior status as righteous and deserved. On this matter, las tejedoras undermine their significance in 2 aspects: their monetary, material supplements, in many cases the sole income of their homes, and their definition of being women, an ideological aspect which, for example, naturalizes childbearing. These 2 aspects address Barreto's comprehensive binary, the material and ideological relations of gender. I will look with you again to this chart, but I just wanted to show you how Barreto's on this side ideological relations and material relations is complemented by Weber's ideological relation on this side, and to your right, political and economic, which is how Weber divides her version of material relations. I have a handout and we will look at this closely, briefly, soon. According to Barreto, the material and ideological relations encompass 2 aspects of any gender system. The material refers to how women are allotted material, like access to public resources or financial aid, and non-material resources, like power and status. While the ideological relations speak to the construction of a gender identity of femininity or masculinity. Although she disentangles the aspects for clarity, she recognizes the constant interaction between gender relation and other intersecting social categories as inevitable, saying it permeates all shapes and subsystems. Barreto does not diminish the importance of the personal, cultural, and political dimensions to gendered subjectivities, but targets these aspects as they relate to the public domain because she asserts that how the ideological relations affect the material relations of gender has not been theorized sufficiently. Moreover, Barreto calls attention to how it's often overlooked that affairs between women and men and the states are gendered relations. She blames this omission on the state's unrelenting pretension that relationships with citizens are gender neutral. Unfortunately, this misconception often leads to counteractive actions like advancing the material relations of gender while simultaneously plummeting its ideological relations. República Dominicana published a study that demonstrated parental subsidies were only given to mothers, which tacitly discharged fathers of child-rearing responsibilities with their children. Deceptively simple, Barreto's concepts act like an overacting framework for Weber's concepts, exposing situations I would not have thought of otherwise. Both theories complement each other and extend their respective explanatory frames of reference. Let me retake the situation with Minolma that kindled my interest for an elucidating theoretical framework. Weber's concepts respond to both my inquiries, invisibility and internalized oppression, and my research questions from a psychological and sociological stance. One of the results of this symbiosis between material and ideological relations of gender and Weber's conceptual framework is the implicit assumption that no action is solely caused by psychological or social causes, nor single-handedly by ideological or material relations. Material relations cannot take place without an ideology, and vice versa. Both ideological or material relations are always at work. Barreto's gender system does not speak directly of internalized oppression, but it will provide a framework to consider the invisibility of an iconic social group, Las Tejedoras de Guano, from the viewpoint of the state. Las Tejedoras are archetypes of Dominican country women. Their craft work is well known and recognized as a national craft advertised during Independence Day and related festivities. Paradoxically, Las Tejedoras are icons in poverty without power, and Barreto's concepts will provide guidelines to assess this beyond a psychological perspective to the outlook of a national political economy. After defining these concepts, I assembled the different methods and determined my feminist methodology. In broad terms, my methods for exploring how this domestic furniture reinforces power relations were the following. I conducted semi-structured interviews about women's power negotiations in relation to weaving, domesticity, and furniture, and triangulate the data gathered from the interviews, the analysis of secondary sources, and participant observation. I'm almost wrapping up. Our story begins in Santiago Rodriguez. As early as 1931, local newspapers singled out the northwestern area it belongs to as one of the main guano producers. But back then, guano was used to supply the tobacco industry. As Juana Ramona told me, yo me crié tejiendo cerones. Eso se hacía para exportar tabaco. I was brought up weaving guano to make cerones. That was done to export tobacco. She knows that she's more than 80, but cannot remember exactly how old. Regardless, what she told me corresponds with what I have read in newspapers from La Capital that, without her knowing it, would record her life from a distance, sometimes inaccurately as they still do. I heard comparable stories from Mamita, Fidelina, and Juana, respectively 81, 87, and 78 years old. The average age of the participant tejedoras that I interviewed is 49 years, ranging from 15 to 87 years old, which speaks of how long there has been weaving in Clavijo, where most admitted to have learned from their grandmothers, mothers, and other women in the village. On January, February, and August 2017, I lived from Minolma and would ride my bicycle to Clavijo, where most of the 86 tejedoras that I spoke with lived. Nor most of the tejedoras de guano had seen the furniture in which the guano they wove became a part of, nor do the women who bought this furniture in La Capital know much about them. The link between Las Tejedoras de Guano and the women who bought the furniture pieces with guano in La Capital is a furniture factory founded in 1982 called Ratán Dominicano. I was unable to obtain a list of the clients who had specifically purchased furniture from the guano collection, but was given a list of 185 clients that had purchased guano from Ratán Dominicano throughout the years. Comprehensively, Some were among the company's first clients and did not owe the recent Guano collection, but the 1980s rattan chairs. However, when I compared what those who had bought guano told me, that rattan and wicker furniture came to represent similar notions regarding status. For example, the first woman I interviewed face-to-face, as opposed to over telephone or via WhatsApp chat, was Bielka. She had purchased a living room set of rattan and wicker furniture in the late 80s after an unexpected divorce, saying, "Esta es otra nueva etapa y ya no quiero cosas pesadas, solo hasta donde yo pueda cargar. This is another new stage and I do not want heavy things anymore, only up to what I can carry." Her description of it being easy to move also seems to complement most interviewees' perception of guano furniture. That is, for 18 of the 20 women that I interviewed in Santo Domingo, their furniture collection was their piece of the countryside in La Capital, and it existed in their homes in opposition to a second living room furnished with either more luxurious or, in their own words, formal furniture and decor. This widespread idea of the appropriate place and use of the muebles de guano has enough leverage to exert its own agency on the users and condition the kind of decor bought to complement it. Why is this kind of furniture not socially acceptable in this high and middle class circle? The answer is tied to a sense of what is proper and respectable. For most interviewees, it lacked formality. The appropriate furniture for the main living room of a home in La Capital are not natural fibers nor anything that invokes the countryside, but more industrial and important materials and textures. To all appearances, the contraposition of handmade materials to industrial one has seeped from La Capital to the countryside. Over 80 of the tejedoras de guano that I interviewed answered no when asked if they had furniture, muebles in Spanish, in their homes, despite having wooden cowhide chairs, tables, and mattresses, most of them in a self-standing iron bed base. They called these bed, chair, table, but not muebles, because that is how they refer to upholstered furniture of the kind one can buy in La Capital. Without being asked, many quickly added that they do not feel bad about not being able to afford this kind of furniture. And in this regard, Las Tejedoras' idea of respectability seemed closely tied to buying only what one can afford and on having sheets and towels in a good state for unexpected visitors in visits to a public hospital where one is advised to take one's own linens. This way, there is only an insinuation of industrialization as progress. That is, progress is not having furniture from La Capital, but one has progress if one has been able to legitimately afford it. So, the fact that middle-class women purchase muebles de guano, but give it a second-class status is, in comparison to industrialized furniture, coalesce with the tejedoras de guano's perception, although for distinct reasons. Accordingly, in La Capital, women's idea of respectability is closely related to what they can possess. Taylor's work with low-class workers from a crowded urban neighborhood of La Capital provides many examples. It is also a matter of good taste. Expending money is not enough. On the other hand, women by La Capital do not have the same expectations for las tejedoras de guanos that they have for themselves or their congeners. So, in every bit of this story, there are things that I have to develop chapter by chapter, section by section throughout my research. But for this seminar, I have focused on answering how the data I have collected answers my research questions within the total number of words allotted. Lastly, after having discussed my findings so far, I have resumed them in the charts screened. I will give you a handout, but I want you to, before I give you this handout, I want you to see that the first column refers to production. The second column refers to the consumption aspect. Within this, it's also intersecting with rows that in the first part refer to the material. Production is a mistake there. Excuse me, material. And in the second row refer to the ideological aspect. Additionally, I've tried singling out which author I had been referring to, writing B or W, referring to Barreto or Professor Weber. So, thank you. This is the handout. I tried.
Okay, thank you, Angélica. Did you want to say anything about this handout that you're giving out at all?
We can look at it together. This is what I just explained. Now that you see it, you would understand better. We have two columns. One, remember my research, I'm looking at production and consumption. So the first column refers to production aspect. The second column refers to the consumption aspect. Additionally, if you check the first rows, the first rows relate to Barreto's material relations, and the second row to the ideological relations. I tried to provide examples that could be related to these theories. You all take a look and we talk in a while.
Questions about it, they can ask you when we get to the questions. So thank
Sure,
you very much.
same.
Unless you wanted to say anything.
Oh no, that is it.
Okay, so thank you, Angélica. We'll go to Dr. Nixon as she's your assessor to start the questions, and then you open it up to the floor.
Sure.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for your very well thought out and really engaging, especially theoretically. I think you spent a lot of important time showing us what your theoretical framework is, who you're engaging with, and why your conceptual framework is really, really strong. It's been really wonderful to read your work and hear how you progress in your research. So it's really exciting, and I think these are really important questions. And I was really struck by how you brought in the state, and I wondered, and you do some of this, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about how you think the state engages the teadoras and guano production in terms of its own national identity. You talked a little bit about it, but I wonder if you could say a little bit more and how you see that entering, as you continue the work, because you're going to do more,
yes,
more
definitely.
Data collection. So I wonder how you're seeing that, and perhaps when we talk a little bit about what do you think are what's at stake then in that, so that's one question. So we can talk a little bit more about that, because it seems to me that there might be also an investment in it in terms of not only the kind of national culture, but also in terms of economic production. So there might be two things happening that are related, which you fleshed out really well.
Miriam, that question is like a Hydra's head, like a lot of aspects. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Let me first tell you that when my country exports tobacco, and it's one of our main, we're known for it, it's one of our main exports. Before, tobacco leaves, in the process that they go through, they were exported in something similar to arganas. Remember, arganas are these packets, but they would use a different weaving technique, and this is how they were exported. They were actually exported, this was the package for them. This was back in the 1900s. And even then, the newspaper articles refer, okay, this is an argana. So a different kind of weaving, more simple than this one, was used to export tobacco. Literally, tobacco leaves were packed here and exported. So even from the early 1900s, before a dictator that we had called Trujillo, it was already a concern that these would soon be prohibited from. So I think the state relationship with the tejedoras, as far as I can trace back, as an economic matter, begins with their work being part of this export product. The newspaper articles expressed concern about how new regulations in world trade will prohibit this to be the package. But nothing was done at the time, and the tejedoras simply did not do this product and continue with this other product. Additionally, the relationship with the state and the tejedoras economy right now, it's not as tight as, let's say, or as relevant as it used to be before. Right now, the tejedoras, as far as I can see, are some sort of icon. It's like a palatable image of motherhood and of women that they empower and disempower at the same time. So I would have to look closely right now, what do the tejedoras represent economically to the state? As far as I can see, it's menial. It's this very small economy, as they lost this link with our trade, to be honest. But the state is still recurs to them as icons. Recently, the latest president in my country would make surprise visits to villages and give money to entrepreneurs. One of the chosen groups were las tejedoras. So they were provided, it's tricky, they were provided with money. The road was fixed, which is what Minolma asked for. And they got electricity, something that they had been, let's say, asking for years. They got it 2 weeks, 4 months, 2 years, and they got all these things. But they don't have where to place their products. That is the problem now. So this is something that has to be looked at. But still, the tejedoras are, it's a double-edged sword in the sense that they're empowered and given money, but one of the things that speaks about them is their motherhood. So they keep on tying weaving as a feminine trade, and that cannot overlook motherhood, which is their main responsibility, even for the state. I don't know if that clarified your question. Sorry, I have aspects to look at still with this.
Yeah, I do.
I'm hoping that Barato's going to help me clear it out better.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also, as you continue the research, to think through that relationship to the state, and then also that image that Dominican Republic may be, using as its kind of cultural markers, like how does guano fit into that, and that may offer you some more.
Okay.
Analyses later on, of course, because the tourism industry and all of that can also sort of may complicate, but also help illuminate some of the ways that you see that reinforcing particular kinds of power relations. And then my second question has to do with empowerment as a concept. It almost seems that that's a big concept. It's a key concept. It's a part of one of your major research questions. And I wonder, you may not be able to answer this right now, but just to think through how are we defining empowerment? Who are you using to help you? Because empowerment is sometimes can be a really a complex, but also a kind of contradictory, but also really super expansive word. And so what does it mean for these women to be empowered? I mean, it might be the thing that you just talked about, which was really interesting, that they demanded to have electricity and finally they got it, or there's been some state investment. But perhaps even thinking about how the women themselves define empowerment, but also who are you using to help conceptualize this amorphous, massive thing called empowerment. So thinking through that, I think, is really important.
Okay.
Yeah, but what are some of your thoughts so far about empowerment? How have you been looking at it?
Initially, it was I was doing a thesis by practice. So my intention at the end was making a furniture collection that I would design and produce with this woman. So at that time, empowerment was one of my basic concepts, but now that I've readdressed, and I had not considered consumption, now that I've readdressed production and consumption, it's still something that I have to look at, I guess, tangentially at least.
Yeah, I mean, I have a few, but I want to open up to hear another two. I just have one. Yeah.
Thank you, Angélica. I think it's really quite clear, and I see the trajectory, and I want to congratulate you. I mean, I was at your first, I see how you've grown to the second, and I think you're growing really well, and I'm very interested, and I see how you're making connections. But there was just one connection that I wasn't so sure about, and I just suggest that you think about it, and it relates to internalized oppression.
Okay.
Connected to that, the state, and so kind of following from what Angela was saying, and invisibility. Because I'm thinking, on the one hand, the women making salient the fact that they didn't finish school, probably comparing themselves to you as researcher, as well as engaging in mothering for all these years, which would be there telling them stories, and then the media and the state constructing them in these archetypical ways. On the one hand, you may say they have internalized what is an oppressive kind of framework, but on the other hand, they might see it as having gotten through, having been able to finance their life, etc. So that very thing might not be internal oppression, it might in fact be a version of empowerment or something
I understand.
like that. And I feel like I'm getting a strong theme that your central question was, how does this create and reinforce material relations of gender? And I see it very much embedded in the state as you have discussed it. Well, not the state only, but structures, you know, that kind of thing. So the pervasiveness and persistence, I see it structurally more than psychologically.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's not, it's just something to contemplate.
Yes, I understand.
Because I think that even if on one part of the psychological you have this internalization, I think that there's another performance coming out from these women that may be their version of power. So it's a kind of comment, not a question.
Can I ask you something back?
Sure.
Okay, you know, this internalized oppression, what I really thought, and the invisibility, I honestly thought it came through, it only occurred to me when Minolma didn't tell me the difference between guano and cane. I was so surprised. I really thought that she must have thought it was not relevant. Looking at this particular situation is that I thought that perhaps from Barrettos and Weber's concept, these two would apply the most. I took it as internalized oppression, that being distinct weaving kinds, and she's an expert, she knows, she has made up more than 20 different weaving strands.
Right.
And she would know the difference. She wouldn't care to tell me.
Oh, you mean because,
I thought she thought it was like small thing not to tell me.
it doesn't really matter. But
That's what I thought.
From a designer's point of view, it could be if one has more privilege and is considered a better material than the other, probably you could take it in that angle, yeah. Like, for example, if guano is considered authentic and the other thing is considered a knockoff. I'm not saying that is what
I
it is.
understand.
Then I could see how, you could say, well, maybe she hid
Okay,
it,
I'll look
you
at
know?
it. Okay.
But something to consider.
See it. Thank you.
Open it?
Yeah. Okay, quite a few things. I was wondering if the guano issue may not just be a simple thing of language change, where when large groupings become smaller, they begin to be encapsulated into a more dominant grouping. I'm just wondering if
Okay, I'll look into that.
That's just one thing.
Okay.
The next thing I want to look at in terms of production, I think that, first of all, I think your presentation was fabulous. Congratulations.
Hey, thanks.
Right, now in terms of production, I think that another issue I wish to look at is how women's skills, traditionally learned in the home at no cost, usually from mothers or other female relatives, is not usually perceived as skilled labor. So when you spoke about
That's what
pardon?
Go ahead.
So when you spoke about the women not being aware of their role as breadwinner, status as breadwinner, and undermine and feeling negative about the fact that it was food, I think they are also unaware of their position as skilled craftspersons, which I think is something that's very important, and that is a universal fact. That many of the skills that women learn in the home are perceived as extensions of nature. You know, like exactly, me's work on the lace makers of Nasipur, or even other works that women do in the home, even things like washing, cooking, cleaning, are not perceived as skills, but of natural extensions of femininity. So I think that is important, that whether they're breadwinners or not, this is I can't do this.
See, it's a talent.
It's a skill.
Like I learned a talent.
But it's something that's learned at no cost to the state. And therefore, in a way, it's not valued and recognized as skilled labor. So I think that's one important thing. The other issue, I think, is therefore in the actual production, I do not know whether this is your plan to actually document the production process. And all of this is important in seeing it as a skill. What goes into this production, what are the knowledges that are necessary in terms of preservation, treating, things like that. And the next thing, in terms of the state, you spoke about the earlier trade arrangements, but I'm wondering, what are the contemporary trade arrangements? I know the Dominican Republic is part of CARIFORUM. I know they're subject to the EPO. Are any of these items exported? Are they only, for local consumption? Is there importation of cheap versions from China or Asia? How do they feature in the whole market? And what is the state's role in this? I know that under the EPA they aren't allowed to subsidize or support it. But how does this feature in terms of the trading, contemporary trading arrangements, etc.? And I like the idea of it as a cultural marker, and therefore what is its significance in the ideology of the state and of the society, and therefore, what happens to it as a result of this. The last point I want to make was on this form where you said the best furniture has masculine qualities. That's I was wondering, what are those masculine qualities? Because masculinity, as far as I understand, is not fixed.
Sí.
Right, so if you could just explain what you mean by that, because the thing is that the furniture could also be described in feminine lines, and if women start to make those furniture, it will be done to be
Sí, I understand.
feminine qualities.
Sí.
I just wanted some clarity in that.
Well, with regards to that last aspect, remember my BA is in design, and then the first master's furniture design too. So I don't want to overlook the fluidity of these definitions, how they change in space and time, but I do not want to undermine that design books have a very particular way of referring to certain styles. So let's say Louis XV is Rococo, and it's always described as the sinuosity of his line as feminine. I'm not saying that may change, but in books, history books, the books of design that we use, it's like Art Nouveau. It's always been described as feminine. While let's say other styles like Art Deco, which is 1920s, Bauhaus, functionalism, have been associated to rational function and masculine qualities. So at least as written in these books, and I don't have a problem with citing these books, as I know this might change, but...
So you're not interested in challenging that received wisdom?
I could, but for now, I just want to voice out this concern, because this is how I was brought up as a designer, as a function related to function, and giving even priority.
But this is an excellent opportunity, to look at that again. And if even you can't replace it, at least to raise it.
Definitely, yeah.
Because on what basis are curvy lines feminine?
Usually it's related, again, it's a very essentialist way.
Exactly. So I think your work in gender and furniture presents an opportunity to at least problematize.
Definitely, yeah. I'll look into it. I'll look into it. I have not seen como Caribbean authors do that, but I do know there's a strong tradition of English authors that have written about this matter. I could look into that for sure, to see what would be sort of our take on it.
But you also will have a take.
Definitely, yeah. And I intend to work with Las Tejedoras, and it's something that when I go back home, I don't want to open a meat shop, this is what I want to do for life. I mean to say, I don't want to veer off to another business. This is what I want to do for life. And when I take the kids there, it's hoping that we can see this material as a noble material, as it is. It's ecological in the sense that I would have to look at this, academically, but from my visits to our botanical gardens, these women take leaves that do not kill the trees, and they make this, and these trees don't take bugs. Like naturally, bugs do not like eating this, so it's very much organic, in a sense. If put a commercial name on it. So I think there's a lot of potential.
Professor Mohammed.
Happy New Year, everyone. First of all, again, like everyone else, to congratulate Angélica and her supervisor for chauffeuring this thesis to the stage where you are so articulate about the many parts that you're dealing with, especially if I remember the first seminar, there's certainly been a lot of progression. So many congratulations. Also your responses for the purpose of the assessor. Your responses, are actually show a very good sense of how you negotiate the material. Mine is just 2 quick points. And one is I really love the anecdotes, the ethnographic peep windows that you give us. The 2 that I picked up, for instance, was the divorced woman who said she wanted light furniture.
Yes, I like that too.
I mean, that is such an amazingly, it is so explosive in terms of what you can do with it, about explaining, gender itself and gender. The second one was, of course, the respectability thing, buying linens for the hospital and so on. But the question actually comes from the structure of the thesis, because the presentation has been rich and it's theoretical for obvious reasons, and you are still going on the field. But when you're going to present the material, how do you find the indicators, the signifiers of the material and ideological through these, and how is that going to be represented? I think that is what will make the reading of it really rich, how you can demonstrate how one goes into the other. So the minute I looked at it, I thought this was such an amazing signifier of how ideological relations are framed, the moving around.
See.
And just it already tells me that marriage is seen as not fixed, the movability, once you're divorced, temporariness of any gender relation become fixed in women's heads. This thing is not fixed. You already fracture what you believe to be ideologically fixed. So the way that is used, I think, is brilliant.
Okay.
And you probably have many incidents. So that's just a comment. The second question, though, and what is the title of the thesis? Sitting on the Artifacts of Gender.
See. And then the subtitle is how does guano furniture production and consumption reinforce gender power relations? But this is something I had not discussed with my supervisor. Just sitting artifacts of gender.
I like the fact that you have it in the title. And it's something I'm seeing. I look at from the point of view of graduate studies too. A title is a shortcut to the entire thesis, right? The term "sitting on" is itself instructive. Sitting on meaning you are playing off on furniture as you sit on it, but you're also sitting on means that you are not using something, you're repressing it. How is it being used? Especially the questions that are being asked to the state. How is the state sitting on these artifacts of gender? So the playing out of that as you continue to write, if it is in your title, it's a very lovely title actually in the class. You make sure that you pull that through.
I understand.
So there were more comments than, but I think I really appreciate the way you are trying to. I think the contribution of the thesis as well is that. Further delineation of Barito's ideological material into really concrete, tangible ways that we've known it exists in some ether. And you kind of pinning it down with a specific example. So make sure you kind of pull that through as when you're writing your contribution, so that we see clearly.
Okay, super.
No, it was nice.
I wanted to bring the tejedoras in, so that's why, if you read it in Spanish, it's not it's like your Creole English is broken. She would say tejer, exploitar, and it's tejer, exportar, but this is I wrote it just like that, to respect how they say it.
I think it would be absolutely necessary.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. First of all, I said I really enjoy photographs throughout the presentation. Capture the kind of vivacious life, and for persons who have not seen those parts of the Dominican Republic, it was exciting. And I would just like to engage your ideas around, your presentation. Put me back to think about my friends and relatives who have 2 living rooms, one for guests who sit on the best furniture, and then the rest of the people who actually inhabit the house. So I wanted to know like the physical setting, because I think it did that way of looking at the production and consumption. But how does consumption come about in the context of utility and the meaning that comes about from that? How people literally sit. So the power relations involved with space. I'm sure, and I know because you were alluding to it in different parts, when you're looking at the way women use it in the capital and the shape of the chairs, how it's kind of first seminar. So I just wanted to know like if you could speak about how people sit on it, especially in the community where it is produced.
The community where I spoke about it, I think briefly, I cut myself short because I was actually running late. What I was saying during the seminar is that in Spanish we have a generic word for furniture. Furniture in Spanish would be muebles. And then as in English you have furniture encompasses chairs, tables, bed, this is all furniture. So the collective word for this is in Spanish is muebles. So my first round of questions, I would ask las tejedores if they had muebles in their homes. I was there in their homes and maybe even sitting on a chair, and they would say, no, we don't have muebles. So I was actually after a Skype meeting with Dr. Hussein that I could exchange some ideas whether you have to go back and ask them what they mean. If you were not sitting on the floor, they do have furniture, but it turns out they leave the word muebles for upholstered furniture. And what they have, like the chairs that they would say, yeah, I made that in my yard with cowhide or the belly of a goat. They call it chair or bed or table, but they don't call it muebles. This happens in the countryside. And then the women in the capital sort of have shared these ideas, but for distinct reasons. The women in La Capital would have like a living room like this, look like this, that usually would have a resemblance to a European original style. And it's the muebles, the furniture, los muebles de Guanos, they have them on the side for like their everyday, and they do say they're more comfortable and that they're there all the time, but they understand, literally they say that you cannot only have muebles de Guano. That is not proper, like that is a no-no. A woman actually said, well, if you don't have any more money, I understand you only have muebles de Guano, but otherwise, you should have this. She was very like adamant about it.
And that way sitting becomes like an expression of power and not just the furniture.
See, I guess again, everything, I guess I see in my head this opposing between everyday life and domesticity.
Yes.
As being again como sort of undervalued, this everyday life, it's, see.
Just to respond to that last point, that the same, it is actually exactly the same in the capital and in the countryside, where the thing that they mostly sit on is not real. It's not
right. That's a good point. It's not right. It's not real.
It's the cowhide chairs and the Ghana chairs that they have in their
that would be there. Yes, you're right.
It doesn't count.
Right. See, many of this furniture, it's either, this is like the typical furniture. Now, this used to be like our kind of furniture, but then, and now it brings me back to Dr. Nixon. I should have mentioned, I mentioned the beginning of the 1900s, but beginning of the 2000, like 2005, one of our previous presidents, he sort of sponsored a boom in a beach area. So with this boom in this beach area, this is that when this company sold the most. So actually, I can see again that relationship there too, that economical relationship. These were mostly sold there for second homes, like in this beach area. They cleaned a beach, and many buildings were built, like boom. Say. How about, but before we leave, how about tell me, has anybody looked at the chart? Does that help at all? Sort of see examples, like very clear examples of how I'm applying or trying to make use of these theories?
I was gonna ask, well, I'll send you more comments when for the written.
Okay.
But I did have some comments about the table, and I was wondering, well, there are just so many places where you can engage the relationship between gender and the state, and I wonder, you might want to think through that even more, especially
Definitely.
in terms of what Prof. Reddick was asking about the production. I think that's really, really useful to think through, like how are things being produced, the relationship between knowledge, trade, export versus import, all of that. But then I was also thinking about this issue of what does it mean to be, when you said that they are icons in poverty and without power. I wondered if you could complicate that a little bit more too, because what does it mean to be without power?
Got it.
Power, there's relations of power, right? I think you really strongly explain how that works, not only in terms of class, but race and geography, right? Whether you're in the capital versus the country. But then it also seems to me that you're saying that the women themselves negotiate power, right? Whether it be in their families or with the state or within the town, within the countryside in which they live. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that, or maybe you're going to engage that a little bit more as you work through it.
See.
Because it may be hard to argue that someone doesn't have any power, right? Or to be
See,
without
I understand.
power. Yeah. But also it seems that you're really invested in making sure that the women's lives themselves, that their stories are being highlighted and told, and that process of reflexivity that you engage here to talk about your own, like as you talk to them, as you collect stories and you work with them to tell these stories, that there's a relationship between you and them, but that also they're negotiating their own relationship. So I want you to think through that a little bit. And also to take up some of the points that were raised, but also I think in many ways you're offering a new theoretical engagement about these issues, and I think you could be a little bit more assertive in that.
Okay.
And that may come with time as you do your research and when you come out the other side and you start really writing everything down for your thesis. But take some ownership in what you're doing, because this is really important, and I haven't seen anything like this, right? So also making sure that you're marking yourself and tracing that trajectory of theorizing about these relationships from a perspective that it seems that hasn't been done before. So I think that's really important. One question that I had, and this may come up as you continue working, are there other, just to sort of think about that comparative work, are there any Dominican or Latin American scholars who've done anything like this in terms of theorizing about power relations in furniture?
Not as far, not to the best of my knowledge, but I keep on checking.
Yeah, because similarly, there may be people who've talked about, obviously gender and power relations, but they haven't thought about furniture, or haven't thought about the women weavers doing this kind of really important skilled work. And thinking about what Prof. Reddick said too around craft, I think that's a really important point that you may want to come back to.
Okay.
That how women's work and craft it's an art, but it's not by the state or by, in museums you often see women's straw work or crafts or dress or materials made, and you don't even see names. Sometimes it's just anonymous or listed under the folk art. There's something really powerful about challenging that and acknowledging this, not only in terms of skill, but also as an art. So I wonder if you can, that may be useful for you as you move forward.
Definitely, thanks.
So, and thank you again. This is really important work, and I'm looking forward to seeing.
Can I make one suggestion about your question? The icons in poverty and without power. I wonder if Amartya Sen's capabilities and entitlements, freedoms, the reference to Amartya Sen would be useful there. If you remember the PhD thesis I gave you to read
one chapter.
Yeah. She used the Sen to look at rural women.
Yes, in Jamaica, I remember.
I see the relevance there.
Got it.
She did
I'll look into
I
it.
have that as a digital copy.
Ah, okay, nice.
Somewhere, all right. I'll share it to you too. The very good
Capabilities.
piece by a Jamaican person. I think you know her name. She's in done through Curtin University. Very good teacher.
Thank you. So, Angélica, just to share two directions that you may be headed with others here in case they have anything to say while
Okay.
while we have them. One is your point about women constructing an alternative development model. We've discussed this. I think
Yes.
it's a really powerful point as you lead to your conclusion. And I think you should just take a moment to explain that a little bit in case anyone has feedback, because I think it's, as we are, I mean, the fact that the framework is taking the material very seriously as a basis for thinking about how the ideological is experienced and lived. I mean, it is the study of furniture and chairs. The material is the seat of the study. And so if you could talk a little bit about what you mean by this alternative development model, and the reason I'm introducing it is because of the conversations we've also been having, Angélica,
Yes.
about questioning neoliberal ideologies about entrepreneurship. You know, on what's going on with those two different ideas that you're trying to work through now as you work towards a concluding set of chapters and observations. You know, what's the meaning about this with the global neoliberal thrust on entrepreneurship, and how do these women show the limitations of that, but also show what you are seeing as a possible alternative development model,
Got
which
it.
is where I think where your ideas and work is ultimately headed, which is separate from the neoliberal entrepreneurship discourse,
Okay.
or different from.
See.
I mean,
Well-
you can just end on that, and that's
Sí,
where
sí.
your ideas are headed, but they haven't gotten a chance to hear you kind of just talk about that, you know, in case there's feedback.
But give me a second, Doctor. Very soon. So the women, las tejedoras, speak about guano as both sort of like a blessing and a curse. One of them told me an anecdote that I think resembles how many of them feel, and what I mean by a blessing and a curse. One of the tejedores told me that when she was around 6 years old, her mom, or a woman in the village was teaching her how to weave. Like, she was curious about it, like, what are you doing, show me. And a little friend of her cousin said, don't learn, because if you learn, this is what you're gonna do. The cousin was sort of advising her, like, if you learn how to do this, you're gonna be condemned to, aside from your mom, every time she needs help, she's gonna ask you, this is what you're gonna do. She didn't take on, and she learned how to weave, and now that she's older, she said, I'm glad I learned. One does not know what one is going to live off. So this is what I mean by it being, she was grateful, but at the same time, she did recognize they find it's very, like, a lot of work, but very little pay. It's a very long process too. They have to cut the leaves, make the leaves green, wait till the leaves dry naturally in the sun. The leaf have to be folded in a particular way. Then they stripe them with knives, and then they start the weaving. And even after the weaving, they need to make 36 feet of strand to then weave the whole argana. The whole argana is another part of the weaving, where this is part of the drying process. The women speak of it, though, as being very grateful, because many times this is the only way they have had to feed their families. So they say that, literally, one of them says, one does not know how to thank a guano palm tree of how many food it has provided for us in difficult situations. So when I spoke to that with Dr. Hussein, she mentioned how this conception of nature being something that one can use in harmony without, like, spoiling it, because one of them, they speak about how killing a guano palm trees, like, it's a crime, because this is how many of them make their livelihood. It's a different model than the model that sees land as land that has not been built upon, as barren and as non-resource, not useful. So tying that in with contradicting neoliberal, I guess, strategies that would say that if you're an entrepreneur and you put effort into your venture, you are bound to have your livelihood or your money income improved. There's a lot of ironies, because this has been happening for more than 100 years, and many of these women have barely seen any better. They're on the verge, sustainable, or I guess they don't make any extra profit. So this is one of this ideas led to this, I guess, what would be my 7th chapter before the conclusion. And this sort of answers how I was going to tie it in. So we have like an introduction, literature review, theoretical framework. Then I have one chapter on las tejedoras, speaking about them. One chapter on the women of la capital. The chapter on the tejedoras is more related to gender and consumption, gender and labor. The chapter of the women in la capital is gender and consumption.
Gender and production.
Oh, excuse me. Yes, las tejedoras is gender and production, gender and labor. The following chapter will be the women in la capital, because remember, we're following the chair. So then the chair moves to la capital, and in la capital is basically consumption. That would be gender and consumption. And after that, we have this new chapter that's talk about how they represent like not a new, but an alternative model, and how that contradicts like neoliberal ideas of how progress should be, and capitalist ideas of that sort. And then a concluding chapter. So that's fairly 8 chapters, tentatively up to now. Did I?
Thank you very much.
We done.
I believe we're done. And this has been very interesting. And I think what you aim to do in this seminar is really present the relevance of your theoretical framework. And I feel like you were able to do that well. And so we move on to your 3rd seminar following this.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Gracias.
Can I ask you a question for you all, Angélica? How does the Institute for Gender Development place the 3rd seminar? When you do your 3rd seminar, where do you place